In a crowded courtroom, a black man faces public humiliation at the hands of a powerful judge. The audience watches in disbelief as arrogance clashes with quiet dignity. Tension builds toward a shocking act that changes the atmosphere in the room forever. "Sit down when I tell you, boy, or I'll make you." The words ripped through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Gasps spread across the benches, every creak of wood echoing the tension now suffocating the room. The courtroom itself was heavy with grandeur, high ceilings lined with carved oak, an American flag draped behind the bench, and sunlight cutting in through tall windows, catching dust in its beams. But in that instant, the solemnity of justice seemed crushed beneath one man's arrogance. The judge leaned forward, his voice dripping with authority and disdain. He was an older white man, his robe wrapped tightly, his jaw locked, and his eyes narrowed in contempt. He towered above from the elevated bench, his authority amplified by the microphone that rattled under his booming tone. Beneath him, a black man stood tall. His suit was immaculate, his shoes polished, his presence calm yet commanding. He held his ground silent, with a steadiness that only unsettled the judge further. "I said sit." The judge barked again, striking the desk with the flat of his palm. The man remained motionless. His jaw clenched ever so slightly, but his eyes stayed calm, locked onto the judge's. A nervous wave moved through the gallery. Some reporters scribbled frantically in their notepads. A woman in the back whispered a prayer under her breath. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, his hand hovering too close to his belt. The silence became unbearable. Then, with startling swiftness, the judge rose partway from his chair, leaned over the bench, and brought his open hand crashing across the man's face. The sound rang out, sharp, violent, humiliating. The entire courtroom recoiled. A collective gasp surged like a wave. A pen clattered to the floor. Somewhere, a man muttered, "Did he just slap him?" The black man's head turned slightly with the force, but he did not stumble. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened. His eyes returned to the judge, calm but unyielding, his silence radiating a dignity that words could never carry. The judge sneered, mistaking composure for submission. "Maybe now you'll remember your place." The man finally spoke, his voice deep, steady, and unshaken. "My place?" He let the words hang heavy in the silence. His gaze drifted across the stunned faces in the gallery before settling back on the bench. "I know exactly where my place is." The judge smirked, but something in his expression faltered. Reporters leaned forward. The air thickened, every second bending under suspense. The man's calm defiance was louder than any protest. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that could unmake arrogance brick by brick. And in that charged moment, the balance of power in the room shifted ever so slightly. The echo of the slap still lingered in the chamber, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the insult. Every person in the gallery sat frozen, eyes wide, breaths held. For years they had seen harsh words, harsh rulings, and harsh punishments, but never a judge striking a man in open court. The black man stood perfectly still, the faint red mark on his cheek glowing beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. His silence was louder than the judge's outburst. It unsettled people, unnerved them. Some felt shame. Others felt fear. But all of them felt that something irreversible had just occurred. The clerk's hands trembled as she fumbled with papers, her eyes darting to the judge as if waiting for instruction. The bailiff shifted uneasily near the door, his jaw clenched, torn between duty and disbelief. "Order!" The judge snapped, pounding his gavel. The sharp cracks echoed, but they sounded hollow now, stripped of authority. "This is my courtroom. Order!" A few murmurs in the back turned into hushed whispers. Did he really? On record? In front of everyone? This is going to blow up. Reporters scribbled furiously, some even sliding their phones discreetly to record notes. They knew a story when they saw one, and this was no ordinary day in court. The judge, red-faced, adjusted his robe, trying to compose himself. "You will respect this court," he thundered, "or you will be held in contempt, and I will make sure." The man raised a hand slowly, palm open, not as defiance but as a signal for silence. And the strangest thing happened. The gallery went quiet. Even the murmurs died. The stillness felt commanded not by the gavel, but by the calm strength of the man standing there. "Respect," the man said softly, his voice carrying despite its calm. "That is a word that should begin with you." The judge stiffened. A wave of unease passed through the room. No one spoke to Judge Alcott like that. Not lawyers, not defendants, not witnesses. But this man did, and he did it without raising his tone. The judge forced a laugh, thin and brittle. "You think you can lecture me in my court?" The man tilted his head slightly, unshaken. "I don't need to lecture you. You've already lectured yourself." For a second, silence weighed heavy again. The judge's eyes darted toward the reporters. His lips pressed together in a thin line. He realized, perhaps too late, that his every word and action had become fuel for something larger than this moment. The gallery could feel it too. This wasn't just about a courtroom anymore. It was about dignity versus humiliation, power versus restraint. A young woman in the back whispered, "He's not just anyone." Her friend leaned closer. "What do you mean?" But the woman shook her head. "I don't know yet. Just watch." The judge banged his gavel again, desperate to seize control. "Enough. I will not tolerate this insolence." Bailiff prepared to remove him, but before the order could be completed, the man took one step forward. Not aggressive, not rushed, just one measured step, enough to freeze the bailiff mid-motion. His voice cut through the silence again, deeper now, edged with something unspoken. "Remove me if you wish. But once I speak, you'll wish you had listened first." The room leaned forward collectively, as though on invisible strings. Even the judge swallowed hard, though he tried to mask it. Something about this man's tone, his certainty, suggested he carried a truth that no one there was prepared to hear. And in that stillness, the power began to shift once more from the bench to the floor. The judge's hand gripped the gavel so tightly that his knuckles paled. He struck it down again and again, the sound sharp but empty, like wood splitting in the distance. The noise no longer commanded respect, it only betrayed his desperation. "Order. This court will have order?" He barked, but the gallery no longer obeyed. They sat forward, leaning on the edges of their seats, eyes trained not on the bench but on the man who stood in the center of the storm. The black man had not raised his voice, had not moved in anger, yet every breath in the room seemed tied to his presence. The red welt on his cheek glistened faintly beneath the overhead lights, a mark of both violence and resilience. The bailiff glanced nervously between the judge and the man, caught between conflicting loyalties, the badge on his chest and the conscience in his chest. "Remove him now," the judge ordered sharply. His words cracked like glass under strain. The bailiff hesitated. "Your Honor." "Do as I say." The man spoke, cutting through the rising tension with a voice steady and controlled. "I am not the one disrupting this court. Look around you." And indeed the room was not disrupted by him. It was the aftermath of the judge's own hand that had set the fire. The whispers, the gasps, the frantic scribbling of pens, all born from one reckless act of arrogance. The judge's face flushed. He knew it too, though he would never admit it. "You will respect this bench," he snapped. The man met his gaze, calm but unrelenting. "Respect is not owed to a chair, Your Honor. It is earned by the one who sits in it." The gallery erupted in a low ripple of murmurs. Reporters' pens flew faster across their pads, some exchanging looks that said everything without words. "This will not stay inside these walls." The judge slammed his gavel again, the sound splintering the room. "Silence," he thundered, but his voice cracked ever so slightly, the veneer of control beginning to chip away. The clerk shuffled nervously at her desk, her eyes darting between the two men. The bailiff stood frozen, still not moving forward. The balance of power in the room had shifted without a single law being cited, without a single outburst, only through the weight of presence and restraint. Black man let the silence linger before speaking again. His voice carried the gravity of something larger than this courtroom. "You think this is about me standing or sitting? It isn't. This is about the weight of your hand and what it represents." The gallery hushed, leaning in. Even the reporters paused their pens. The man's words seemed to reverberate in the walls themselves. He was not just responding to the slap, he was holding a mirror to everything it meant: arrogance, abuse, systemic power. The judge stiffened, his eyes darting nervously toward the press seats. He realized what was happening. This was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. For the first time, sweat trickled down his temple. His gavel hovered midair, his voice stuck in his throat. The man stood silent again, letting his words hang. The pause was deliberate, a silence heavy enough to make the audience question not him, but the bench above. A reporter in the front row whispered, "He's not afraid at all." Another muttered, "There's something about him, something we don't know yet." The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. He tried to sit taller, to force authority back into his tone. But no matter how high his bench was built, he could feel himself shrinking under the weight of eyes now watching him differently. The courtroom had turned. The courtroom was no longer a chamber of law, it had become an arena of silence. Every shuffle, every cough, every whispered breath felt amplified against the charged stillness that hung between the bench and the floor. The judge sat rigidly, his face pale beneath the flush of anger. His fingers tapped against the wooden armrest of his chair, an impatient rhythm that betrayed his unease. For decades, his word had been law. His gavel had ended disputes, silenced defiance, crushed dignity. But today, none of it worked. Across from him, the black man stood tall, unmoving. His cheek still bore the faint mark of the slap, but his eyes were steady, fixed not on anger but on truth. The gallery remained transfixed. Reporters leaned forward, some holding their breath as if afraid to miss a single syllable. Ordinary citizens who had come out of curiosity now sat stunned, realizing they were witnessing something history might one day retell. "Bailiff," the judge barked again, his voice strained. "Remove this man immediately." The bailiff took a step forward, then froze. His boots clicked against the marble floor, echoing louder than they should have. His hand hovered near the man's arm, but something stopped him. The stillness of the man, the gravity in his presence, rooted him to the ground. The man did not move, did not flinch. He simply turned his head, meeting the bailiff's eyes. The look was not threatening, but it carried weight. And the bailiff stepped back without a word. A ripple of whispers filled the gallery. "Did you see that?" He couldn't touch him. "What is going on here?" The judge slammed his gavel again, but it no longer sounded like authority. It sounded desperate. "This is my courtroom," he thundered. "You are nothing here without my word." The man's voice answered, calm and measured, slicing through the chaos like a blade. "Your word," he said softly, "has already condemned you more than it ever could me." The gallery gasped. A woman covered her mouth. A man in the back whispered, "Who is he?" The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His robe, once a symbol of unquestioned power, suddenly felt heavy on his shoulders. He gripped the armrest again, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed something the audience had never seen in him before: doubt. The man continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "You think silence makes me small. You think restraint means weakness. But silence has weight. Dignity has power. And today it is not you they are hearing." He gestured faintly toward the gallery without lifting his gaze. Indeed, every eye in the room was fixed on him, not the bench. The judge tried to interrupt, his words stumbling out. You dare," but the man's composure drowned him out. His calm wasn't just defiance, it was revelation. The people were seeing the imbalance, the arrogance, the ugliness of power wielded without conscience. The silence stretched again. This time, it wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, full of unease, full of something that even the gavel couldn't strike away. And in that silence, for the first time in his career, the judge felt what it was like to lose a courtroom. The air in the courtroom felt heavier now, as though every breath carried the weight of the moment. The judge shifted uneasily in his chair, his robe no longer a shield but a burden. He had struck the man, humiliated him before all, yet somehow the power was slipping through his fingers. The gallery knew it too. At first, there had been only whispers, nervous and restrained. Now the silence held something different, a presence, a collective awareness. Every person in the room understood they weren't just watching a proceeding. They were witnessing a battle for dignity. The black man stood tall at the center, his silence filling the chamber like a tide. His cheek bore the faint reminder of the slap, but it no longer looked like a mark of weakness. It looked like a scar of truth. A young reporter near the front scribbled a line in her notepad. "The gavel cannot erase what the hand has done." The judge banged the gavel again. 3 sharp strikes that echoed across the chamber. "Enough!" he roared. "This court will not be turned into a spectacle." But the spectacle had already begun, and it wasn't one he controlled. The man raised his eyes slowly, his voice calm and deep. "You made it a spectacle the moment you let your hand speak louder than your law." Gasps spread through the benches. A few people nodded, ever so subtly. Even those who had come expecting routine proceedings now felt something stir inside them: indignation, recognition, shame. The bailiff swallowed hard, his boots rooted to the floor. He had never seen anyone stand so still, so calm, and yet command more respect than the man on the bench. The judge's lips trembled as he spoke, trying to wield his authority like a weapon. "You are here under my authority. Without it, you are nothing." The man tilted his head slightly, the hint of a steady, unshaken smile crossing his face. "Then why does it feel like the room no longer believes you?" The gallery reacted instantly. Whispers surged again, louder now, as if the dam of silence had begun to break. "He's right. People are actually watching him, not the judge. This is history." The judge slammed the gavel again, each strike louder than the last, but it was no longer order he was commanding. It was his own fear he was fighting. "Silence, or I will clear this courtroom," he threatened, his face reddening, but even his threat rang hollow. Clearing the courtroom would not erase the memory. It would not erase the ink already scratched into reporters' notepads, nor the shame imprinted on the faces of those who had witnessed the slap. The man remained calm, his voice steady but cutting. "You cannot silence what has already been seen. You cannot erase what has already been heard." The judge leaned forward, his jaw tight, eyes darting across the room. For the first time, he felt not like the most powerful man in the chamber, but the most exposed. And the gallery? They sat taller now. They looked not at the bench, but at the man standing in quiet defiance below it. The tide had shifted. The courtroom had become a battlefield, but no one had raised a fist. No one had shouted, cursed, or thrown a punch. The war was silent, fought with dignity on one side and arrogance on the other. The judge's voice thundered, but it rang thinner with every word. "This is my courtroom. I will not tolerate defiance." He struck the gavel so hard that the wood cracked, a small splinter flying from its head. The sound startled even him, and for a moment his hand trembled. The man did not flinch. He stood calm, shoulders square, eyes steady. The welt on his cheek had begun to fade, but in its place was something stronger, a symbol. Reporters scribbled faster than ever, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few exchanged quick glances that said silently, "This story will break wide open." The clerk at her desk shuffled nervously, avoiding the judge's gaze. Her pen slipped from her hand and rolled onto the floor, the tiny clatter echoing like thunder and She didn't bend to pick it up. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the man. The bailiff, once so quick to obey, now stood motionless by the wall. His chest rose and fell heavily, caught in the pull between duty and conscience. He couldn't ignore what he had seen. The black man's voice filled the chamber again, calm but edged with undeniable weight. Authority does not come from volume. It comes from justice. And justice is what this room no longer feels. The gallery stirred. Some nodded quietly. Others stared at the judge, their eyes no longer fearful but questioning. Doubt had begun to spread like cracks in marble. The judge leaned forward, his face red, his words stumbling as though they had lost their rhythm. You presume to lecture me? You think yourself above this court?" The man met his glare without hesitation. "Above it? No, but beyond it? Perhaps." The words struck the room like lightning. Reporters stopped writing mid-sentence. The gallery gasped. Even the bailiff's jaw dropped slightly. The judge's eyes widened. "What do you mean by that?" The man let the silence linger before answering. "You struck me because you believed I was powerless. But power is not always what you see standing before you." His words carried a strange gravity, a warning without threat. The gallery leaned forward, sensing the veil was beginning to tear, that there was something about this man they did not yet know. The judge tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. "You speak in riddles as though anyone here cares who you are." But that was a lie, and they both knew it. Every face in the courtroom now cared. Every eye was fixed on him, waiting, wondering. The man looked slowly around the room, his expression calm, his voice deliberate. "One day soon, you will understand. And when you do, it won't be me you'll fear losing respect from. It will be the people who trusted you to wear that robe." The judge's throat tightened. He reached for his gavel again, gripping it like a lifeline. But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. The room was listening to the man, and the cracks in his authority had become too wide to hide. The air had thickened, heavy with anticipation. The courtroom was no longer a chamber of order, it was a stage where every glance, every whisper, every silence carried meaning. Reporters exchanged knowing looks. Their pens tapped nervously against notepads. Some already had headlines in mind, words forming before the story was even complete. "Judge strikes black defendant in court." But beneath the scribbles and murmurs, something else was spreading, a whisper, soft but insistent, rippling through the gallery like a hidden current. "Who is he?" A woman whispered to her neighbor. "I don't know, but he's not ordinary," came the hushed reply. The judge slammed his hand against the desk. "Quiet in my courtroom." His voice cracked, desperation cutting through his arrogance, but the command fell flat. The room had stopped obeying him. The man turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the gallery without speaking. His silence carried more weight than the judge's shouting. The clerk shifted uneasily, unable to keep her eyes down. She had worked under this judge for years, seen him mock defendants, belittle attorneys, throw his weight around. But never like this. Never had he lost a room so completely. The bailiff swallowed hard. His hand rested near his holster, but not out of threat, out of fear. Not of the man, but of what the judge might do next. The man finally spoke, voice low but commanding. Truth spreads faster than fear. You can silence one voice, but not all. The gallery leaned in closer, as though drawn by invisible gravity. Even the reporters who had come for scandal now realized they were witnessing something greater. Not just a courtroom outburst, but the unraveling of power itself. The judge sneered, his words sharp but hollow. "You think their whispers will save you? This is my courtroom. My word is law here." The man's gaze cut through him, steady as stone. Law does not belong to a man. It belongs to justice. And justice cannot be owned. A murmur of agreement swept through the gallery. The sound was soft but undeniable, like the first drops of rain before a storm. The judge's hand shook as he raised the gavel again. He wanted to slam it down, to crush the moment beneath the echo of authority. But he hesitated, because he knew, even if he struck it, the sound would not silence the doubt. The man stepped forward, not in defiance, but in quiet dignity. His voice lowered, yet carried across the chamber with ease. "You struck me, not because I was guilty, but because you believed I was small." That mistake will echo longer than any gavel. The clerk's breath caught. A reporter's pen froze mid-word. The gallery stiffened in collective awe. The judge paled, his jaw tightening. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. The silence that followed was not his. It belonged to the man. And for the first time, the robe looked less like authority and more like a costume that no longer fit. The judge gripped the gavel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Sweat beaded at his temple, sliding down beneath the rim of his robe. He had presided over hundreds of cases, crushed countless defendants with his authority, yet never had he felt this exposed. "You will respect this bench," he barked. His voice, meant to thunder, cracked under its own strain. The black man did not raise his voice. He simply stood, his posture calm, his eyes fixed on the trembling figure in robes. The welt on his cheek still glowed faintly, a reminder of the strike, a scar that now symbolized the judge's unraveling power. "Respect," the man said softly, "cannot be forced. It is earned." The gallery shivered at the words. A reporter's pen slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. The sound rang louder than the gavel had minutes earlier. The judge pounded the desk. You dare lecture me?" His outburst only magnified the cracks. He looked less like a figure of law and more like a child desperate not to lose control. The man tilted his head slightly, his voice a calm blade cutting through the noise. "You struck me thinking I was beneath you. But what happens when the world learns the truth of who I am?" A ripple tore through the gallery. Heads turned, whispers erupted louder now, no longer hidden. "Who is he? What does he mean?" The bailiff shifted uneasily, his loyalty teetering. He had always obeyed without question, but tonight the air tasted different, heavy with history being written. The judge leaned forward, his face red, spit at the corner of his lips. "You're no one. Just another man wasting this court's time. Do you hear me? You are nothing." The courtroom froze at the word. Nothing. The man's expression did not waver. His silence after the insult was deafening. He let the word hang in the air long enough for everyone to feel its weight, its cruelty. And then, softly, he spoke, "You will regret saying that." The judge recoiled as though struck by his own gavel. His breath caught, his chest rising and falling in erratic bursts. He looked around the room, but every eye stared back at him with suspicion, judgment, and quiet disapproval. The gallery no longer saw a man in authority. They saw a bully shrinking under the light. The man's calm voice carried once more, measured and steady. "You think you've humiliated me, but you've only unmasked yourself." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the buzzing of the overhead lights seemed to hush. The judge's hand trembled over his gavel, but he did not bring it down. He couldn't. For the first time, he knew. The gavel no longer belonged to him. The courtroom no longer belonged to the judge. It was his chamber, his desk, his gavel, but every set of eyes had shifted away from him. There. Gazes clung instead to the man he had struck, the one who stood with quiet dignity even as bruises still marked his cheek. Whispers ran like a current under the wooden rafters. They no longer hid them. The gallery was alive with speculation. Who is he? He's not ordinary, you can see it. I swear I've seen his face before. The judge slammed his gavel, the sharp crack echoing through the chamber. Order! He roared, his voice breaking halfway through the word. There will be silence or I will clear this courtroom. But no one stirred. No one moved to obey. The authority he once wielded had thinned to the weight of paper. The gallery wasn't afraid of him anymore, and he felt it. His chest heaved as he glared down at the man. You think this is some kind of game? You stand there as if you're untouchable. You are nothing here. Nothing. The man's lips parted slightly, but he didn't rush. Every second of silence drew the room deeper into his orbit. When he finally spoke, his words were low, steady, deliberate. I am not untouchable. I am accountable, as we all should be. But the difference between us, Judge, is that I know who I am. And you do not. The judge's brow furrowed. What nonsense! The man raised a hand, calm but commanding. You struck me because you believed I was just another defendant. But when you hit me, you struck something larger than me. And soon, the world will see exactly what that means. The gallery gasped, a collective inhale of anticipation. Reporters scribbled furiously now, pens flying across notepads. Some abandoned writing altogether, holding their phones low to capture every moment in trembling video. The bailiff's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He had been trained to protect the judge, to enforce his commands, but the magnetic pull of truth was stronger than training. His hand twitched toward his belt, not for his weapon, but for the phone he wasn't supposed to use on duty. The clerk sat frozen, eyes wide. She had never seen her boss falter like this, never seen his words bounce back against him like rubber bullets. It was as though the robe itself had shrunk, hanging awkwardly on a man who no longer filled its weight. The judge leaned forward, voice sharp but weak in conviction. You think this theater will change anything? These people don't care who you are. They don't matter. The man's eyes hardened. They matter more than you know, because truth belongs to them. And it is truth, not arrogance, that lasts. The gallery stirred again, louder now, nodding, whispering. The energy in the room tilted further. The judge's breath came faster. He slammed the gavel again, but the sound no longer commanded silence. It sounded desperate, hollow, the echo of authority slipping away. You will tell me your name, he demanded, voice trembling. You will tell this court exactly who you think you are. The man inhaled deeply, his calm composure unshaken. He looked around the courtroom, his gaze lingering on the faces staring back at him, some hopeful, some fearful, some simply stunned. His voice dropped into something almost intimate, yet strong enough for all to hear. My name is not important yet. What matters is the lie that has ruled this room for too long, the lie that power is louder than justice. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, desperate for the next words. The judge's hand trembled. His face had turned scarlet, his lips quivering with rage he could no longer disguise. Enough of this, enough! You will obey this court or you will be held in contempt. The man tilted his head slightly, a quiet smile ghosting across his lips. And what will you do then, Judge? Strike me again? Or will you let the world see what happens when dignity stands taller than your gavel? The gallery erupted in low, thunderous murmurs. Some even clapped softly before being hushed. The judge's eyes darted around, realizing with horror that the room was no longer his. The man's words cut through again. You called me nothing. But I assure you, when the truth arrives, you will wish I were. The judge stumbled back into his chair as though struck by invisible force. His chest rose and fell, sweat dripping from his temple onto the polished wood of his desk. The silence that followed wasn't his command. It belonged to the man who stood before him, calm and unwavering. The revelation was coming. The gallery could feel it. The judge could feel it. And the man himself, he was ready. The courtroom pulsed with silence, a silence thicker than any gavel strike could break. The gallery leaned forward, breaths caught, waiting. Everyone knew something was coming, something inevitable and unstoppable. The judge sat stiffly, his hands trembling on the arms of his chair. His robe, once a symbol of authority, now looked like a shield fraying at the edges. He could feel the weight of every stare, every whisper, pressing down on him like judgment itself. You, he stammered, voice cracking. You will tell this court your name. Right now. The man, calm as ever, raised his chin slightly. His cheek still bore the faint redness of the slap, a wound now glowing like a badge of defiance. His voice, deep and steady, rolled through the chamber. My name is not just a name, he began. It is a responsibility. It is a trust carried for millions who believe in fairness. And that is why your strike today was not against me alone. It was against the very office I hold. The gallery stirred violently. Gasps echoed. Reporters' pens nearly tore their paper. Some dropped them entirely, their phones rising instead, lenses glowing red to capture history. The judge blinked, his mouth parting in disbelief. What office? The man stepped forward, each stride deliberate, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor. His eyes locked onto the trembling figure in robes. I am the Chief Prosecutor of the United States of America, he declared. I am the one trusted by the White House to uphold justice in this nation. And today, you struck me as if I were invisible. The room erupted. The gallery exploded into gasps and shouts. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, their cameras shaking. The clerk's hand flew to her mouth, eyes brimming with shock. The bailiff froze, his eyes wide, caught between duty and revelation. The judge's face drained of color. His hands slipped from the armrests, gripping desperately at the desk as though it could hold him upright. No, that can't, you're lying. But the man's presence told the truth louder than any denial. His words, his composure. The storm of recognition sweeping the gallery, it was undeniable. The man's voice thundered, not in volume but in certainty. I walk into courts across this nation to demand fairness. I stand before juries to demand truth. I carry the weight of the people's trust. And today, in this courtroom, you revealed not my weakness, but yours. The gallery erupted into applause. It began with a single clap, hesitant, then another and another, until the room shook with it. The walls themselves seemed to hum with the sound. The judge slammed his gavel in desperation, but each strike was drowned by the roar of approval. Silence. Silence. He screamed, his face purple with fury and fear. But the more he shouted, the less he was heard. The man lifted his hand slightly, and the room fell into quiet, not for the judge, but for him. His command had replaced the gavel. He looked directly at the judge, his eyes piercing. You thought yourself untouchable. But today, you will be remembered not as a man of law, but as the one who struck justice in the face. And that will follow you longer than your robe. The judge's body sagged into his chair. His eyes darted wildly, searching for support, but none came. The bailiff looked away. The clerk's gaze had hardened. The gallery's judgment weighed heavier than any verdict. The man's voice lowered, intimate but sharp. You are no longer feared. You are no longer respected. You are simply exposed. The judge trembled, his gavel slipping from his grip, clattering against the wood with a hollow, final sound. For the first time in his career, the courtroom did not belong to him, it belonged to the truth. The man turned, addressing the gallery, his words resonant. Justice must not bow to arrogance. And no robe, no title, no false authority can erase dignity when it stands firm. The applause rose again, louder, unstoppable. Reporters rushed from the room, phones glued to their ears, racing to deliver the headline that would shake the nation. The judge sat frozen, his world crumbling. His legacy had been shattered in a single strike, not the one he delivered, but the one that revealed who his victim truly was. The man walked slowly toward the exit, every step echoing like a drumbeat of inevitability. The bailiff stepped aside without hesitation, his eyes lowered in silent respect. The doors opened. Light from the corridor spilled into the chamber, flooding the room like truth itself, and with that, the man left the judge to drown in his silence.